Christian McCaffrey is back. Our best friend Will Levis is also back as well, and Nico Collins has a chance of playing. These are just a few reasons why I wait till the end of the week every week to go through every single matchup to find the must-start and sit defenses for the particular week in fantasy football. So just make sure to go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm the only fantasy YouTuber who covers defense more than one time a week on a consistent basis. Our first matchup is our Giants and Panthers game that is overseas. This game is in Germany, so make sure to have your lineup set by Saturday night because it will take off at 8:30 in the morning Central Time. And I believe the Giants are a must-start defense. Listen, the Giants defense, they're in great position this week. There are still a lot of starters out for the Giants defense, but it's also just important to know the Panthers are obviously one of the worst teams in the league. Their offense could go anemic anytime, and their starting left tackle is out. Adam Thielen is also out, so they're basically left with Xavier Worthy and Jacob Coker. I mean, those are just not good enough to get the job done on a consistent basis, especially against the defense that actually has held a lot of teams to few points. They just are a bend but don't break defense until they break, because they do break, because the defense spends all day on the field most of the time because our offense can't move the ball. Well, this game is a little bit different here. Carolina's defense, I also say, if you can stomach this one, it is a possible play. A possible play. Their defense is awful. It's one of the worst defenses in fantasy football, and it's still banged up. But of course, the Giants' offense is not particularly good as well. Darius Slayton's already been ruled out of this game, so one of their deep threats is not playing in this game. But obviously, they've got Malik Neighbors, they've got Tyrone Tracy Jr., so they're going to be fine offensively with weapons. It ultimately comes down to, do you believe this is a game overseas where Daniel Jones has one of his more turnover-prone games? I think it's possible. That's what puts the Panthers inside of playable territory, but obviously, the best defense in this matchup is going to be the Giants' defense. The Patriots at the Chicago Bears this week. With Chicago, I still think they're a really good start. I mean, the Chicago Bears defense, if you just take out the last 2 weeks, they've been great in fantasy football. Their defense gets after quarterbacks. They also get tons of turnovers. Their secondary has been electric this year. And the Patriots offense, with Drake May, they've actually been a lot better and are getting a lot more yards, but they're also turnover prone. Drake May does make mistakes, and that's another reason I think the Bears are a good play. The only problem that I see here is that Jaquan Brisker is out. Their starting safety, he's been really good for them this year. And this whole Tyreek Stevenson thing, it's been a little bit weird, obviously. So how did they respond coming off a really embarrassing loss to the Cardinals? I mean, it's 2 straight embarrassing losses. Do they rebound well, or do they continue to look bad? I have a hard time believing they don't rebound well against the Patriots offense, especially when you see the line on this game according to Vegas. They're not expecting many points. I'm not expecting many points. And I'll say the Patriots defense is potentially playable for a lot of the reasons I just laid out. They've been a bad football team since the bye week. Caleb Williams is not playing his best football. This offense looks totally in shambles, and their offensive line is already awful, and both of their starting tackles are now out of this game. Now, the Patriots defense, not particularly great in fantasy. A lot of their starters are still banged up and out of this game. But I do think you can do worse. You know, I would play them over the Panthers defense. I wouldn't play them over the Giants defense. But I think the Bears are clearly the best play in this matchup. But I don't think the Patriots are the worst play in the world in Week 10 fantasy football. The San Francisco 49ers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. The 49ers are, of course, a really good play this week. Their defense has realistically been super aggressive at the point of attack. They're getting turnovers. They're getting sacks. And these quarterbacks are having a rough time. You know, Baker Mayfield is already injured in this game. He's going to play, but he's been banged up over the past several weeks because his offensive line hasn't done the best job of protecting him, and obviously he's without tons of weapons here. There's already no top 2 wide receivers. Bucky Irving and Jalen McMillan, they're still both banged up as well. So he's still working on minimal usage, but of course Baker's been really good. This just isn't a great week for him when you're talking about playing a defense in fantasy. I think the 49ers defense in fantasy this week, really good play. The one thing I'll say here is obviously you don't play the Bucs, and especially with McCaffrey back, it's not going to be worth it. But I will say Debo and Juwan Jennings, if they don't go, it could be a little bit interesting. But ultimately, I just wanted to name those because they're important injury news. But I will not consider playing the Bucs defense this week. The Denver Broncos at the Kansas City Chiefs this week. I think Kansas City and Denver are both viable plays this week. They were both inside the top 12. of my top 12 defense rankings this week for good reason. Listen, there's no major injuries to speak of here. Both these teams are pretty healthy, aside from McCole Hardman, who is questionable. Obviously, the Chiefs have been dealing with tons of injuries, specifically to the wide receiver position, but they just keep overcoming them. So I can't realistically rank the Denver Broncos defense a better play than the Chiefs defense, even though the Broncos defense has been better in fantasy football. They definitely have been for the entire year. I still think they're playable for that reason. I do think this divisional game will, make it interesting and potentially a low-scoring matchup, which is what Vegas is expecting as well. But with Kansas City, obviously, the problem with Denver is that they're hot and cold offensively, and they're also turnover prone. Bo Nix has not shaken the turnover bug quite yet. So Kansas City, just based on that, the way they've been playing the past month, they're the better defensive play, and I believe they're must-start, whereas Denver's defense, high-end playable option, but not a must-start option. Buffalo Bills at the Indianapolis Colts this week. I think Buffalo's a great play as well. Listen, with Buffalo, you've got to look at it from a couple different aspects. Joe Flacco was awful last week. He was objectively terrible. He was not only just not throwing the ball well, his O-line wasn't protecting him very well, and he was throwing interceptions last week. So he was just bad from all angles here. Now, what are the chances that he plays better? Well, his offensive line's still banged up, and one of his best weapons, Michael Pittman Jr., he's out of this game. So, it's Josh Downs, it's Jonathan Taylor, and then cross your fingers for a good play from the tight end or another wide receiver like an Alec Pierce or an Adonai Mitchell. It's not a guarantee here that he has a bounce-back game. The Bills' defense is really healthy. They've been playing mostly great fantasy football. Obviously, you're going to play the Bills' defense, in my opinion. Now, the one thing I'll say about the Colts here, again, I'm not going to play them. Potentially playable because Amari Cooper is a true questionable. Hasn't practiced very much this week. Even in limited fashions, he hasn't been able to catch the ball yet. This injury's bothering him. And Keon Coleman already been ruled out. So it's Khalil Shakir, it is Dalton Kincaid, and then you've basically got James Cook. I'm not going to play them personally. That was on the border of being a playable defense. Ultimately, I strayed away from doing it because I don't think the Colts will be particularly great this week in fantasy football on the defensive side. The Bills are just too explosive offensively for me. The Pittsburgh Steelers at the Washington Commanders. Speaking of another offense that's very, very, very explosive, the Commanders, obviously, I think that both of these defenses are playable, though. Here's the funny thing about this one. Is that the Steelers, they don't really have many injuries on their side of the ball. They have some backups on the defensive side that are a little bit banged up, but overall, they're not really banged up here. They're also coming off a bye week. And I actually was going to go through this earlier in the week. I came out with a new video of important stats to know for Week 10. This one barely missed the cut. But know this, the last 4 rookie quarterbacks the Steelers have played, only one of them had more than 12 fantasy points, and that was CJ Stroud last year. Now, obviously, Jaden Daniels is clearly, like CJ was last year, been the best rookie quarterback. So, do you think that the Steelers can play them well off a bye week, or do you think that Jaden Daniels continues business as usual where he's getting 20 to 25 fantasy points per game? I think it's interesting to discuss because the Steelers defense has been very good in fantasy because they're opportunistic. And their special teams oftentimes gives them a boost in this number as well. This is keeping them playable. And in addition, Brian Robinson Jr. did not practice today, and he is likely going to be a game-time decision. So, again, might be without their starting running back here. Now, Washington, their side of the ball, I think they're playable as well. Their defense has actually been pretty solid in fantasy for the most of the last month or so. Their defense banged up, though. It is definitely banged up, and Marshawn Lattimore, their new corner addition, has been ruled out of this game as well. So ultimately, it comes down to a belief that I just don't think the Steelers' offense is that good. I think they're a little bit of a fugazi right now with Russell Wilson. Not saying they're bad, but I just don't trust this offense. I think that both these defenses are playable in their own particular ways. I prefer the Steelers just so slightly over the Commanders, but both of them might end up being decent plays. The Minnesota Vikings at the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. If you don't look at the Vikings this week as a must play, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, this doesn't get better. The Jags are horrible. They're a failing team. They're a disgrace of an organization. Trevor Lawrence has likely been ruled out. He has not been ruled out technically, but he's not going to play. All running backs, all of them. Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne, Dearness Johnson, they're all questionable in this game. All of them are banged up in their own way. Brian Thomas Jr., Gabe Davis, they're questionable. They are ravaged with injuries. They're bad already. and the Vikings defense has been great. You take out one game this year, they've been a tremendous fantasy defense. I don't know how else to say this to you. Play the Vikings defense and stay as far away as possible from the Jaguars defense. The Atlanta Falcons at the New Orleans Saints. I think the Falcons is a solid play this week. I don't love their defense. I want to get that out of the way very, very fast. Their defense in fantasy, not been good. But the Saints offense is atrocious, man. First of all, the Saints have lost 7 straight games. I don't know if people realize that. They have not won. They started out 2-0. They're 2-7 now. They've been awful. Awful. As a collective organization. Chris Olave, of course, has been ruled out of this game, and their second best receiver at this point, Cedric Wilson, he's questionable. So it's like they don't have any really good players on this offense aside from Kamara. And Carr is obviously turnover prone. And the Falcons are also getting back a very important linebacker, Troy Anderson. So the Falcons defense, they're just a play for me. Just plain and simple. I'm just taking the opportunity against a really bad offense, the New Orleans Saints. And the Saints defense, I'm not playing them either. I mean, they have had so many opportunities to bounce back as a defensive fantasy, and they're not doing it, man. The only thing that's worth noting here is that Drake London is questionable, but it doesn't move the needle for me. It doesn't matter, because Bijan's not questionable. Darnell Mooney's not questionable. Kirk Cousins isn't questionable. You stay away from the Saints, and I'm personally playing the Falcons, not over the likes of Minnesota, but I definitely am going to play the Falcons in a lot of other situations. The Tennessee Titans at the Los Angeles Chargers. Again, if you don't think the Chargers are a must-start defense, I don't know what to tell you. You are just not seeing things. This is not your game. Fantasy is not your game. The Chargers defense is fantastic play this week. Number 1, I already had them as the number 2 defense this week. They actually moved up to number 1. And you want to know the reason why? Because Will Levis has been declared the starter this week. We want Will Levis at quarterback. He is giving us early Christmas gifts this week. He will have things gift wrapped. He'll have the football gift wrapped, and he'll just give it right to you and say, here you go, Merry Christmas. It's going to be fantastic. I love Will Levis playing for the Titans because it means that not only are the Tennessee Titans going to score very little points, they're going to turn the ball over too. The Chargers secondary is banged up. Ultimately, it doesn't matter when you're playing Will Levis here. And Tony Pollard is also questionable in this game. Like, the Titans are bad. Will Levis is bad. He turns the ball over all the time. The Chargers defense has been really good in fantasy. You play the Chargers and you don't play the Titans. Their defense is banged up, and the Chargers have been scoring more points on a per-game basis, specifically over the past month. The New York Jets at the Arizona Cardinals this week. And listen, I don't think there's a must-play in here. I do think the Cardinals are a pretty decent option this week. They were inside my top 10 this week of my defense rankings, right there on the line, basically. I don't view them as a must-start or anything like that. Because obviously, if we see the Jets look the way they looked last week, they're going to be a tough play. Now, obviously, they're coming off a mini bye because they played a Thursday night game. So that should bode well for the New York Jets here. But what I'll tell you is this. The Cardinals not only have been a low-key good play in fantasy this year, their offensive line, the Jets' offensive line, is already banged up. And even when they're fully healthy, they're not that great. So the Cardinals, I expect them to get after Aaron Rodgers in this game. So even if the Jets put up 21 points on the Cardinals this week, I think the Jets could end up giving like 6 or 7 sacks to Aaron Rodgers and the Cardinals. The Cardinals defense has been low-key aggressive this year. Now, the one thing I'll say about the Jets, they're so on the border of playable. James Conner is questionable. If he is ruled out for this game, the Jets become playable. Not a high-end play. I wouldn't play them over the Cardinals. I wouldn't even play them over somebody like the Denver Broncos or even the New England Patriots, but I do think they could become playable because James Conner would just remove a really important offensive piece from this offense. So monitor this one. I think the Jets are playable. They're just not my favorite play of the week. Their defense has been objectively bad since they fired Robert Saleh, with the exception of playing a weak and battered Houston Texans team a week ago. The Philadelphia Eagles at the Dallas Cowboys this week. And I believe, listen, the Eagles defense, like their defense is hot and cold. They were improving over the past month and a half in fantasy. And then last week, like they almost lost the game to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Horrible. But their defense here, it just doesn't get a lot better than this, right? The Eagles defense has been playing better for the most part outside of that Jacksonville game. And the Cowboys are horrendous. They're a disgrace themselves. And of course, they're banged up. No Dak, obviously. CeeDee Lamb's questionable. And that's the two most important pieces to this offense. So you remove one of them, It's just not going to be good. It's not going to be a good story. The Cowboys are going to turn the ball over, and they're not going to score many points. Eagles are crushing them this week. You play them. And then the Cowboys defense, you don't play them at all. Like, there's just no shot you play the Cowboys defense. Philadelphia, all their main pieces are playing. They're absolutely crushing it offensively over the last month. You just can't play the Cowboys defense anytime soon. The Detroit Lions at the Houston Texans this week. Listen, the Lions are, I think, a solid play. They're as close as it gets to a must-start without being a must-start. Here's the deal with the Lions defense, right? First of all, Nico Collins, who is probably going to be questionable in this game, he did return to practice on Friday. So whether he plays or not, that's still up for debate. He did not practice all week outside of Friday. So we'll have to see if he ends up suiting up. Obviously, if he plays, this is not as good of a play. The one thing that keeps me in the loop with the Lions play this week, though, is that the Texans' offensive line, they're banged up, and they've already been really bad. There's a reason last week and last several weeks, Stroud has been getting crushed by his offensive line. I think the Lions, just the way their pass rush looks, I think they're going to get after CJ Stroud. So again, even if the Texans put up 21 points on them, I think they're going to end up being a solid play in fantasy. They may get a turnover out of the deal, and they're going to get a bunch of sacks. That's why I think the Lions are a good play. We need those splash plays in fantasy, and the Lions can do that here. And the Texans defense, you just don't play them because just the situation with the Lions, like, they're a healthy offense. They're rolling right now. Nobody's able to take advantage of this Lions offense. They don't make mistakes, and they're explosive. The Texans defense has been good, but they're banged up, and this is just not a good matchup to do it with. But I'll tell you this for sure, if you haven't gotten in on Underdog, this is the week to do it. You've got CJ Stroud here sitting here with a projection of 0.5 total yards on Underdog. You hit the higher on this, you're winning free money, basically. If you haven't taken advantage, go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, use code FFN to sign up for Underdog. When you hit the higher on the sweat-free projection for CJ Stroud this week, Underdog will match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. And our last matchup of the week, the Miami Dolphins at the Los Angeles Rams. Listen, with the Rams defense, they are playable as well. They are right outside my top 12. Right outside. As close as it gets to being in the top 12. Their defense has been low-key really good the past several weeks. And it gets better and better and better every time I watch them. The one thing I said about this earlier this week is the Rams defense, their pass rush specifically, they've got some dogs. Byron Young and Jared Verse, they're dogs over there. The Dolphins' offensive line also banged up. What's the one problem they've had this year? Protecting Tua. That's been their biggest problem this year. So I do think the Rams are going to end up getting after Tua in this game. I think it could be a high-scoring game, but if they start to beat the crap out of Tua, this game is not going to be as high-scoring, and I think the Rams, either way, end up being a good play. Whereas the Dolphins here, you just don't play them. The Rams have all their playmakers, and the Dolphins defense isn't that good in fantasy as is. So let me know how your lineup is starting to look this week, and if you want to see where all these defenses ended up in my top 12 rankings this week, click on this video right here.